Do you hear it? The echoes of the past, the whispers of forgotten truths, fragments of memories lost in the shadows. Welcome to BRAINROT, Echoes, where we bring you stories long buried, unravel mysteries cloaked by time, and guide you through the darkest corners of the mind and the universe. Each video is more than just content. It's an echo resonating deep within, urging you to question, to wonder, to explore. Backend index pointing right, hit subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and join us in listening to the echoes the world tried to silence. Kale's voice cracked through the comm channel like a whip. Honestly, I couldn't blame him. If some random alien had just announced they'd met his dead father and owed him a planetary favor, he'd probably be demanding answers too. "Look, kid," I said, adjusting my position in the cramped cockpit of my salvaged ship. "Bad decisions. It's a long story, and frankly, I'm not sure you're going to believe it. Try me." The steel in his voice reminded me so much of his old man that I actually laughed. Big mistake. The comm went dead silent, and I could practically feel the temperature drop through the vacuum of space. "Sorry," I said quickly. "It's just you sound exactly like him when you get pissed. Same tone, same everything. It's uncanny. You really knew my father?" And there it was, the crack in his armor, the tiny note of hope that he was trying so hard to hide. Hell, I'd been there. When someone you love dies in the black, you cling to any connection, any story, any proof that they mattered. Yeah, I knew him. Elias Vance, right? Engineer, stubborn as a mule. Had this weird habit of humming old Earth songs when he worked. Silence. "Then how did you know?" "Because I watched him build my entire world, sweetheart. Literally. And I mean that in the most literal sense possible. Let me back up here because this is where the story gets weird. And I mean weird. Not just, oh look, another human doing something impossible. Weird. Although to be fair, it's definitely that too. 3 years ago, I was dying. Not the dramatic, heroic kind of dying. The slow, embarrassing kind where your body just gives up because you've been breathing recycled air and eating synthetic protein for too long. My homeworld, Nova Prime, had been strip-mined to death by the hegemony. They'd sucked out every useful mineral, poisoned the atmosphere, and left the survivors to slowly suffocate on a dead rock. Fun. I'd managed to scrape together enough credits for a one-way ticket off-world, figuring I'd rather die in space than watch my planet's corpse rot around me. That's when I met your father. He was just there. I continued, watching the stars drift past my viewport, sitting in the spaceport bar on Kepler Station, nursing a whiskey and looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. I was 3 drinks in and feeling philosophical about my impending doom when he struck up a conversation. What did he say? He asked me what I'd do if I could save my world. Just like that. No build-up, no small talk. What would you do if you could save your world? Like he asked about the weather. The truth was I'd laughed at him. Here was this human, and humans had a reputation for being crazy. Sure, but they were also known for being broke as hell, asking me about saving planets like it was some casual Tuesday activity. I told him I'd probably start by finding a way to reverse atmospheric toxification, but that it would take technology we didn't have and resources we couldn't afford. You know what he said? What? He said, "Well, that's convenient. I happen to have both." Kale made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. That sounds like him, always making impossible promises. Yeah, well, this time he delivered. And that's the part that still makes my head spin, because Elias Vance, human, broke, supposedly just another refugee from Earth's diaspora, proceeded to save my entire world. And he did it in the most human way possible, by completely ignoring every rule of physics, economics, and common sense. He started by buying my planet. He what? Bought it, the whole thing. Turns out the hegemony was so eager to get rid of what they considered a worthless hunk of rock that they were willing to sell it for practically nothing. Your dad showed up with a credit chip and a contract, and just bought Nova Prime. I could hear Kale's breathing through the comm. How did he have that kind of money? That's what I asked him. You know what he told me? Patent royalties. Apparently, he'd invented some kind of atmospheric processor that could break down toxins and convert them into breathable air. The hegemony had been using his design for decades without paying him a single credit. So he sued them. Oh, he did more than sue them. He sued them, won, and then demanded payment in the form of industrial equipment and raw materials instead of credits. Said money was just numbers on a screen, but gear could rebuild worlds. It was brilliant, really insane, but brilliant. The hegemony found themselves legally obliged to provide Elias with enough terraforming equipment to rebuild 3 planets. All because they'd been too arrogant to pay patent fees to some random human. But here's where it gets interesting, I said, settling back in my pilot's seat. He didn't just fix the atmosphere and call it a day. Oh no, that would have been too simple. Your dad decided to completely redesign my world's ecosystem from the ground up. What do you mean? I mean, he turned Nova Prime into a paradise. Not just habitable, perfect. He engineered plants that could grow in previously barren soil, created weather systems that would maintain themselves for centuries, and built cities that could expand and contract based on population needs. And that's when I realized I was dealing with something more than just a clever engineer. Elias Vance was an artist, and his canvas was an entire world. He worked for 2 years straight, I continued. Barely stopped to eat or sleep. I tried to help where I could, but most of the time I just watched him work. And that's when I noticed the humming. He hummed when he was concentrating, Kale said softly. Always old songs, Earth songs. Yeah, blue skies, somewhere over the rainbow, that kind of thing. Said it helped him think, but there was one song he hummed more than any other, especially when he was working on the residential districts. I paused because this was the part that still got to me. He hummed Puff the Magic Dragon while he built the children's play areas. Every single one of them. Said it was his daughter's favorite song when she was little. The calm went quiet again, and I gave him a moment. Hell, I needed a moment too. Even 3 years later, thinking about Elias and his quiet dedication to a daughter he'd never see again made my throat tight. He talked about you, I finally said. Not all the time, but enough. He was proud of you. Said you were studying xenobiology, that you wanted to help species find new ways to coexist. He told you that. He told me a lot of things, mostly late at night when we were sitting around the construction sites waiting for the atmosphere processors to finish their cycles. He'd talk about Earth, about what he'd left behind, about the mistakes he'd made. What mistakes? And there was the question I'd been dreading. Because the truth was Elias Vance had been running from something when I met him. Not the law, but something much worse, his own guilt. He blamed himself for leaving Earth. I said carefully, for leaving you. Said he thought he was doing the right thing, going out into the galaxy to find opportunities, to build something better for his family. But then the communications went dark, and he couldn't get back. It was a common story. Unfortunately, the early days of human expansion had been chaotic, with families scattered across the galaxy by economic necessity and political upheaval. Promises to return for loved ones, to stay in touch. They'd all been broken by the simple realities of vast distance and time. He never stopped trying to find you, I continued. Every port we stopped at, every communication hub, every passenger manifest. He was always looking, hoping, but he found you instead. There was hurt in his voice, and I couldn't blame him for it. But he was wrong about the sequence of events, and I needed him to understand that. No, Kale. He decided to save my world because he couldn't find you. He said that if he couldn't be a father to his own daughter, at least he could help someone else's family have a future. That shut him up. I could hear him thinking, processing, trying to reconcile the father he remembered with the man I was describing. The day he finished the last atmosphere processor, I said, he sat down on a hill overlooking the main settlement and just smiled. First time I'd seen him truly happy since I'd met him. The air was clean. The water was pure. The soil was fertile. 3 million people could live good lives on a world that had been dead just 2 years earlier. 3 million refugees from a dozen different worlds. Your dad had been quietly spreading the word through the underground networks. Anyone who needed a new start, anyone who'd been displaced by the hegemony's expansion, anyone who just wanted a chance to build something better. He gave them all a home. And that's when I understood what Elias Vance really was. Not just an engineer, not just a terraformer, but a gardener. He planted seeds, not just of plants and trees, but of hope, of community, of possibility. But he didn't stay to see it grow, Kale said. No, he left the day after the last family arrived. Said his work was done, and it was time to move on. Time to keep looking for you. Time to keep looking for you. I tried to convince him to stay, of course. Offered him a place in the government we were setting up. A home in the city he'd designed. A chance to see the fruits of his labor flourish. But Elias Vance was a man driven by purpose. And his purpose was finding his son. He gave me this ship, I said, patting the console of bad decisions. Said I needed to keep an eye on things, to help people who needed help. Make sure his work didn't go to waste. And you've been doing that for 3 years? 3 years, for months, and 16 days. But who's counting? Actually, I was counting. Every day since Elias had left, I'd been counting. Because I'd made him a promise. And promises to dead friends are the kind you keep. How did you know he was dead? Kale asked quietly. Because he would have found you by now if he wasn't. He was the most stubborn, determined person I've ever met. If Elias Vance was still alive, nothing in the galaxy would have stopped him from tracking you down. It was a hard truth, but it was the truth. Elias had been searching for 3 years when I met him, and he'd had leads, connections, resources. If he'd been alive for the past 3 years, he would have found him. Where? He asked. Asteroid belt near the Vega system. Pirates hit his transport. No survivors. I got in the news 4 months ago through the same underground networks Elias had used to find refugees for our world. His ship had been identified in the wreckage. His body recovered and identified. He died as he'd lived, helping others. The transport had been carrying medical supplies to a colony world when the pirates attacked. I'm sorry, I said. I know that's not the ending you wanted. It's the ending I expected, he replied. And there was something in his voice that made me sit up straighter. I've been looking for him too, for the past 5 years. 5 years. Ever since I graduated from the academy, I've been tracking refugee movements, following up on sightings, chasing down every lead. I knew he was alive, and I knew he was looking for me. Why didn't you stay put? Make it easier for him to find you. He laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Because I'm his son. Sitting still and waiting for rescue isn't in my DNA. Fair point. From what I'd seen of Elias, patience wasn't exactly a family trait. So what now? I asked. You found someone who knew him. Got your answers. What's next? Now I want to see it. See what? The world he built. The people he saved. The legacy he left behind. I should have seen that coming. Of course, he'd want to see his father's greatest work. Of course, he'd want to understand what had driven him. What had given his life meaning in those final years. It's not exactly a tourist destination, I warned him. We're still building, still figuring things out. And the hegemony isn't thrilled about having a thriving, independent world right in their backyard. I can handle myself. I'm sure you can. But can you handle 3 million people who are going to want to thank you for having the father you had? Because that's what would happen. The moment word got out that Elias Vance's son had come to visit, every single person on Nova Prime would want to shake his hand, tell a story, express their gratitude for the man who'd given them a second chance. I think I can manage, he said dryly. All right, but I'm warning you, the hero worship can get a bit intense. Your dad is basically a legend down there. They've got statues and everything. Statues, 3 of them, 1 in each major city. All of him in his work clothes, holding different tools. The one in New Haven shows him with an atmosphere processor. The one in Kellertown has him holding a soil analyzer. And the one in Paradise Falls depicts him with a weather controller. They named a city after him. They wanted to name them all after him. I had to talk them out of it. Figured Elias would have been embarrassed by the attention. Actually, I knew he would have been embarrassed. The man had been constitutionally unable to accept praise or recognition. He'd preferred to work in the background, to let others take credit for his achievements. It was part of what made him so effective. Nobody saw him coming until it was too late. All right, Kale said finally. I'm coming to see this world my father built, but I have conditions, such as no ceremonies, no speeches, no official welcomes. I want to see what he built, not what people want to tell me about what he built. That's going to be tricky. Like I said, you're basically royalty there. Then don't tell them who I am. I thought about it. It would be difficult, but not impossible. Kale was a common enough name, and Vance wasn't exactly unique. If we were careful, we could probably give him a tour without triggering the inevitable celebration. What's your cover story? I asked. I'm a xenobiologist studying successful terraforming projects, which honestly is true. And you're my guide. You're my guide. Simple as that. All right. But when this inevitably goes sideways and you end up giving a speech to a crowd of grateful colonists, I'm going to remind you that I warned you. Deal. Where do you want to meet? I'm currently in the Centauri system, wrapping up a research project. I can be at Nova Prime in 2 weeks. 2 weeks it is. I'll have guest quarters ready for you. Just don't make a big deal out of it, okay? Wouldn't dream of it. I cut the comm connection and leaned back in my chair, staring out at the stars. 2 weeks to prepare for the arrival of Elias Vance's son. 2 weeks to figure out how to show him the world his father had built without overwhelming him with the gratitude of 3 million people. This was going to be interesting. 2 weeks later, I was standing in the spaceport of New Haven, watching Kale's ship, a sleek research vessel called Distant Shores, descending through the atmosphere. The sky was the perfect shade of blue that Elias had engineered, with just enough clouds to make it interesting, but not big enough to block the twin suns. I'd managed to keep his arrival quiet, but just barely. Word had gotten out that a xenobiologist was coming to study our terraforming project, and there was considerable excitement in the scientific community. Thankfully, excitement wasn't the same as recognition. The ship touched down with barely a whisper, and I found myself holding my breath as the airlock cycled. I'd seen pictures of Kale in the files I'd pulled from the refugee networks, but they'd been old, from before he'd left for the academy. I wasn't sure what to expect. The airlock opened, and he stepped out. He looked exactly like his father, not in the obvious ways. He was shorter, lighter, with long dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. But he had his eyes, his posture, his way of taking in everything around him with a single sweeping glance. And when he spotted me across the landing pad, he smiled with the same quiet confidence that had convinced me to trust a stranger in a spaceport bar 3 years ago. "You must be Hrix," he said, walking over with his hand extended. "Guilty as charged," I replied, shaking his hand. "And you must be the xenobiologist who's definitely not here to see statues of her father." He laughed. "Definitely not. Although I have to admit, I'm curious about the atmosphere composition. The readings I got during descent were remarkable. Your father was a perfectionist. He didn't just want the air to be breathable. He wanted it to be perfect. How perfect? See for yourself." I gestured toward the city spread out below us. New Haven was built into the side of a mountain, with terraced levels that followed the natural contours of the rock. Elias had designed it to work with the landscape rather than against it, creating a settlement that looked like it had grown there naturally. "It's beautiful," Kale said softly. "Wait until you see the residential districts. Your dad had some very specific ideas about how people should live." We took a transport down into the city proper, and I watched Kale's face as we passed through the different levels. The commercial district was bustling with activity, but not chaotic. The residential areas were quiet and green, with plenty of open space for families to gather. The industrial sections were clean and efficient, with none of the grit or noise that typically feature manufacturing centers. "He really did think of everything," he murmured, watching children playing in a park that had been built around a natural spring. He said cities should be places where people could be happy, not just survive. We stopped at a small cafe in a market district, and I ordered us both coffee. The beans were grown locally, another of Elias' innovations. He'd engineered a coffee plant that could thrive in the local soil while producing beans with a unique flavor profile. "Tell me about the people," Kale said, sipping his coffee and watching the crowd move through the market. "What do you want to know? How do they adapt? I mean, you're talking about 3 million refugees from dozens of different worlds, with different cultures, different languages, different ways of life. How do they all get along?" It was a good question, and one that had been on my mind a lot in the early days. The potential for conflict had been enormous. Take that many displaced people from that many different backgrounds, put them on a new world, and ask them to build a society together. It should have been a disaster. Your father built more than just a world, I said. He built a community. Every decision he made, from the layout of the cities to the design of the public spaces, was meant to encourage interaction and cooperation, such as the central plazas are designed so that people from different residential districts naturally cross paths. The work schedules are staggered so that different cultural groups share meal times. The schools are integrated not just by age, but by background. Social engineering. Exactly, but subtle social engineering. People think they're making their own choices, but the environment is guiding them toward positive interactions. Kale nodded slowly. That's brilliant. And it's working. See for yourself. I gestured around the cafe. At the table next to us, a family of Centauran refugees was sharing a meal with what looked like a human couple and their teenage daughter. Across the room, a group of Andromedan traders was deep in conversation with a table of local farmers, presumably discussing some kind of agricultural exchange. They're not just coexisting, Kale observed. They're actually interacting. That's the difference between a refugee camp and a community. Your dad understood that. We finished our coffee and continued the tour. I showed him the atmospheric processing stations, the agricultural sectors, the manufacturing districts, the research facilities. Each area was a testament to Elias' vision of what a human could be. Efficient without being sterile, productive without being exploitative, modern without losing touch with the natural world. But it was when we reached the residential district that Kale finally broke down. This is where most of the families with children live, I explained, leading him through a neighborhood of small, comfortable houses surrounded by gardens. Your dad spent extra time on this area. Said it was the most important part of the whole project. The houses were modest, but well-designed, with enough space for privacy, but not so much that neighbors felt isolated. The streets were wide enough for children to play safely, but narrow enough to maintain a sense of community. And everywhere, absolutely everywhere, there were places for kids to explore, to learn, to grow. He built this for me, Kale said quietly, stopping in front of a playground where a dozen children were playing some kind of elaborate game involving climbing structures and anti-gravity balls. He built it for all of them, I corrected gently. But yeah, he was thinking about you. How do you know? Because he told me. He said every child deserved a place where they could be safe, where they could learn, where they could dream about the future. He said he'd failed to give that to his own son, but maybe he could give it to someone else's. Kale wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I had that growing up on Earth, before everything went wrong. I had that. He knew. He just wished he could have given you more. We stood there for a while, watching the children play. The game they were playing seemed to involve creating elaborate structures with the anti-gravity balls and then knocking them down in spectacular fashion. It was joyfully creative and completely pointless. Exactly the kind of thing kids should be doing. What happens now? Kale asked finally. What do you mean? To this place. To these people. The hegemony isn't going to let an independent world thrive indefinitely. They'll find a way to bring you back under their control. He was right. Of course. We've been lucky so far. The hegemony had been dealing with larger problems elsewhere in the galaxy. But eventually they'd turn their attention back to us. And when they did, our independence would be at risk. Your father thought of that too, I said. He left us with more than just a world. What do you mean? The patents, the technology, the knowledge, everything he used to build this place. He made sure we understood it, could replicate it, could improve on it. We're not just consumers of his work. We're inheritors of it. And that's enough to keep the hegemony at bay. It's enough to make us valuable to them. More valuable as partners than as subjects. The truth was, I wasn't sure it would be enough. The hegemony had a way of taking what they wanted, regardless of legalities or ethics. But it was the best chance we had, and it was the plan Elias had left us. I want to help, Kale said suddenly. Help how? I don't know yet, but this is my father's legacy. I'm not going to let the hegemony destroy it. I looked at him carefully. Are you sure about that? Because getting involved in this fight could change your life quite dramatically. You've got a career, a life somewhere else. You don't owe us anything. I owe him everything, he said fiercely. And I owe you for taking care of what he built. You don't owe me anything either. I owe you for being his friend when he needed one. I owe you for listening to his stories about me. I owe you for making sure his work didn't die with him. He was crying again, but these were different tears. These were tears of gratitude, of resolution, of purpose. Besides, he said, wiping his eyes again, what kind of son would I be if I didn't finish what my father started? I grinned. The kind who didn't inherit his stubbornness. Too late for that. 6 months later, I was sitting in the same spaceport bar where I'd first met Elias Vance, nursing a whiskey and watching the news feeds. The hegemony had just announced a new partnership agreement with the independent world of Nova Prime, granting us full autonomy in exchange for licensing rights to our terraforming technology. It wasn't a perfect deal, but it was a fair one. And more importantly, it was a deal that would let us keep building, keep growing, keep being the kind of community Elias had envisioned. The architect of the agreement was sitting across from me, reviewing the final contracts with the same focused intensity his father had brought to atmospheric processors and soil analyzers. You know, I said, he would have been proud of you. Kel looked up from his tablet. You think so? I know so. You negotiated a better deal than anyone thought possible. You found a way to protect 3 million people without compromising our independence. You did what he would have done. I had a good teacher. He left you more than lessons. He left you a world full of people who believe in the same things he believed in. That's a pretty powerful legacy. He nodded slowly. I'm thinking about staying here. Here. There's still so much work to do. The terraforming is just the beginning. We need to study how the ecosystem develops, how the social structures evolve, how the technology adapts to new challenges. And you want to be part of that. I want to be part of what my father started. Is that probably crazy? But it's the good kind of crazy. He laughed, and for a moment, he looked exactly like his father had looked the day he'd finished the last atmosphere processor. Genuinely happy, sincerely hopeful about the future. There's something I want to show you, he said, pulling up a new file on his tablet. What is it? A proposal I've been working on. A new project based on everything we've learned here. I leaned forward to look at the screen. The proposal was for a series of new settlements, each designed to support a specific type of refugee population. One for victims of environmental disasters, one for political refugees, one for economic migrants. Each settlement would be tailored to the specific needs of its inhabitants, but all would be connected by trade, communication, and shared governance. You want to build more worlds? I said, I want to build a network of worlds. Places where people can go when they need a fresh start, where they can contribute to something larger than themselves. That's ambitious. It's what he would have wanted. He saved one world, but there are millions of people out there who need saving. Why stop at one? I looked at the proposal again, at the detailed plans and careful calculations. It was brilliant, ambitious, and completely insane. It was also exactly the kind of project that Elias Vance would have loved. You're going to need help, I said. I was hoping you'd say that. I'm in, but I have one condition. What's that? We named the first settlement after him. Not Kellertown. That's too obvious. Something subtle. Something he would have appreciated. Kel smiled. I was thinking Haven's Rest. A place where wanderers can find peace. Perfect. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars through the bar's main viewport. Somewhere out there in the vast darkness between worlds, there were people who needed what we were building. People who needed hope, who needed a second chance, who needed someone to believe in them. Elias Vance had started something bigger than himself, and now it was up to us to keep it going. It was a big responsibility, but it was also the kind of work that makes life worth living. You know what the best part is? Kel said finally. What's that? He's not really gone. Every time someone breathes clean air on this world, every time a child plays in one of those parks, every time a family finds a safe place to call home, he's still here. He was right. Elias Vance lived on in every decision he'd made, every system he'd built, every life he'd touched. He'd left us more than a world. He'd left us a way of thinking, a way of approaching problems, a way of believing that things could be better. And that, I thought, was the most human thing of all. To Elias, I said, raising my glass. To Elias, Cale agreed, raising his. We drank to the memory of a man who'd built worlds and saved lives, and never stopped believing in the possibility of a better tomorrow. And then we got back to work, because that's what he would have wanted. After all, there were still 3 million people counting on us. And somewhere out there in the darkness between stars, there were millions more who needed someone to believe in them. It was going to be a hell of a job, but that's what humans do. The impossible, the improbable, the absolutely necessary. We build worlds, save lives, and leave legacies that outlast our own brief candle flames. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get to do it in the company of people who understand that the work is more important than the glory. Elias Vance had understood that. His son understood it too. And that, more than all the terraforming technology and social engineering in the galaxy, was what gave me hope for the future. The work will continue, the dream will grow, and somewhere in the vast darkness of space, more wanderers will find their way home.